The autumn wind carried the scent of decay across the reinforced perimeter of Haven Settlement, where Sergeant Marcus Chen stood his final watch atop the 20-foot concrete barrier that had protected 3,000 souls for the past 5 years. His weathered hands gripped the cold metal of his rifle as he surveyed the endless wasteland beyond, where twisted remains of civilization stretched toward a blood-red horizon. The settlement behind him buzzed with the sounds of life that had become precious beyond measure, children laughing in the schoolyard, the rhythmic hammering of the blacksmith shop, and the gentle hum of the hydroponic gardens that kept them all alive. Marcus had sworn an oath to protect this fragile sanctuary, but tonight, everything would change. The emergency radio crackled to life with a transmission that made his blood run cold. "This is Command Base Alpha to all remaining settlements. We have confirmation of a massive horde movement, approximately 50,000 strong, heading northeast. Estimated arrival at your coordinates in 72 hours. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Marcus's mind raced as he processed the implications. 50,000 infected meant certain death for Haven Settlement. Their defenses, impressive as they were, could handle perhaps 1,000 at most. He thought of his daughter Sarah, now 16 and leading the settlement's youth council, and his promise to her dying mother that he would keep their little girl safe in this hellish new world. The sound of footsteps on the ladder behind him announced the arrival of Dr. Elena Vasquez, the settlement's leader and the woman who had helped him hold on to his humanity when everything else had fallen apart. "You heard the transmission," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We need to discuss options." Marcus nodded grimly, knowing that their options were limited and time was running out. The infected, once human beings transformed by a virus that had swept across the globe like wildfire, retained enough primal intelligence to hunt in coordinated groups. This particular horde had been tracked by satellite for weeks, consuming smaller settlements and growing stronger with each victory. Below them, the settlement's inhabitants went about their evening routines, unaware that their world was about to shatter once again. Marcus could see the Henderson family preparing dinner in their small apartment, old Tom Peterson tending to his rooftop garden, and the Michaels twins playing chess in the community center. These people had lost everything once before and had slowly rebuilt their lives within these walls. They deserved better than to face another exodus into the dangerous unknown. "There's something else," Elena continued, pulling out a sealed envelope marked with the official seal of the North American Resistance Command. "This came with the transmission. It's classified orders, Marcus. They want us to evacuate the settlement and relocate to the Rocky Mountain Fortress. But they're only authorizing transport for essential personnel and children under 12. The weight of those words settled between them like a stone. Essential personnel meant perhaps 50 people out of 3,000. The rest would be left to fend for themselves in a world where survival was measured in days, not years. Marcus felt the familiar rage building in his chest, the same fury that had kept him fighting when lesser men had given up. He had joined the military to protect people, and even in this post-apocalyptic nightmare, that oath still meant something. "We're not abandoning anyone," he said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led men through the darkest days of the outbreak. "There has to be another way." Elena's expression softened with something that might have been hope. She had known Marcus long enough to recognize the determination in his voice, the same resolve that had convinced 1,000 refugees to follow him to this place when the government safe zones had fallen. "The old subway tunnels," she said quietly. "The ones that run beneath the city. If we could get everyone down there before the horde arrives." Marcus's tactical mind immediately began working through the possibilities. The tunnels were extensive, running for miles in every direction, and they connected to several other settlements that might provide refuge. But they were also dark, dangerous, and filled with smaller groups of infected that had been driven underground by the larger hordes. It would be a desperate gamble, but it might be their only chance to save everyone. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Marcus made his decision. He would not let these people face the same fate as the billions who had already fallen. His oath as a soldier, as a protector, and as a father demanded nothing less than everything he had to give. The battle for Haven Settlement's survival was about to begin, and Marcus Chen would make sure that when the history of these dark days was written, it would tell the story of people who refused to surrender their humanity, even when the world itself had died around them. The emergency council chamber deep beneath Haven Settlement buzzed with tension as Marcus spread the tactical maps across the reinforced table, his hand steady despite the weight of impending doom. The concrete walls that had once provided comfort now felt like the confines of a tomb as he addressed the 12 council members who held the fate of 3,000 souls in their weathered hands. Elena sat at the head of the table, her medical training evident in the way she methodically processed each piece of devastating information, while the other leaders, farmers, engineers, teachers, and merchants who had become warriors out of necessity, stared at the red circles Marcus had drawn to mark the Horde's projected path. Satellite imagery confirms the worst-case scenario, Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed the fall of civilization firsthand. The infected mass is larger than anything we've seen since the initial outbreak. They're moving with purpose, not just wandering. Something is driving them toward us. The room erupted in worried murmurs as the implications sank in. Tom Peterson, the settlement's head of agriculture, leaned forward with trembling hands. My God, Marcus. 50,000? Our walls can't hold against that many. We've never faced more than a few hundred at once. Marcus nodded grimly, remembering the night 3 years ago when a horde of 800 had nearly overwhelmed their defenses, leaving 43 dead and countless wounded. That attack had taught them the limits of their fortifications, and this new threat exceeded those limits by a factor of 60. Elena's voice cut through the rising panic with practiced calm. We need to focus on solutions, not problems. Marcus, what are our options? Before he could answer, the chamber door opened with a soft hiss, revealing Sarah Chin in her settlement patrol uniform, her young face bearing the same determined expression that had carried her father through countless battles. Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with terror as he realized his daughter had inherited more than just his stubborn streak, she had inherited his sense of duty. Dad, I've been monitoring the radio traffic, Sarah said, stepping forward with confidence that belied her 16 years. The settlements at Riverside and New Hope went dark exactly 47 minutes ago. The infected aren't just moving randomly, they're systematically eliminating every community in their path. The council members exchanged horrified glances as the full scope of the threat became clear. This wasn't just another horde migration. It was a coordinated campaign of destruction that threatened to wipe out the last remnants of human civilization in the region. Marcus felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders, the same burden he had carried since the day he had convinced these people to follow him to this place. There's something else, Elena said, producing a second radio message that had arrived just minutes before. Command Base Alpha is offering immediate evacuation for essential personnel and children under 12. They have transport aircraft en route, but they can only take 200 people. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 people out of 3,000 meant leaving behind nearly the entire community, families, friends, neighbors who had become brothers and sisters in the struggle for survival. Marcus could see the calculations running through each council member's mind, the impossible arithmetic of deciding who deserved to live and who would be abandoned to certain death. That's not happening, Marcus said firmly, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. We didn't build this place to abandon it at the first sign of real trouble. We built it to protect everyone, not just the lucky few. Sarah stepped closer to the table, her youthful idealism shining through despite the horror of their situation. The old subway tunnels, she said, pointing to a section of the map that showed the underground transit system that had once connected the major cities. I've been exploring them during my patrol shifts. They're extensive, and they connect to at least 3 other settlements that might be able to help us. Marcus studied the map with renewed interest, his tactical mind immediately grasping the possibilities. The tunnels were dangerous, filled with smaller groups of infected and prone to flooding, but they offered something that the surface world no longer provided: multiple escape routes and the possibility of moving large numbers of people without detection. Elena leaned forward, her medical knowledge adding another dimension to the plan. The tunnels would provide protection from the horde, but they also present significant health risks. Poor air quality, potential for disease transmission, and limited medical facilities if someone gets injured. The debate that followed was intense but brief, with each council member weighing the risks of staying against the dangers of fleeing. Marcus listened to every argument, every concern, every desperate suggestion, but his mind was already made up. He had sworn an oath to protect these people, and he would not break that promise now, even if it meant leading them into the depths of the earth itself. As the meeting concluded with a unanimous vote to attempt the tunnel evacuation, Marcus felt the weight of history settling upon his shoulders. The decision they had just made would determine not just the survival of Haven Settlement, but the future of human civilization in their region. The gathering storm was about to break, and they would meet it head-on together as they had always done. The pre-dawn darkness masked the desperate exodus as Marcus led the first wave of evacuees through the concealed entrance to the subway tunnels, his tactical flashlight cutting through the oppressive blackness that had swallowed the underground transit system years ago. The air hung thick with the scent of decay and stagnant water, a testament to the horrors that had taken refuge in these forgotten depths during the initial outbreak. Behind him, 57 civilians clutched their meager possessions and followed in silent terror, their footsteps echoing off the cracked concrete walls like whispers of the dead. Marcus had chosen this group carefully: families with young children, elderly residents who couldn't wait for later evacuations, and several of his most trusted fighters who would help establish the first safe zone in the tunnels. Elena remained above ground, coordinating the phased evacuation that would hopefully move all 3,000 residents underground before the horde reached Haven Settlement's walls. The plan was ambitious and fraught with danger, but it was their only chance to save everyone without abandoning the most vulnerable members of their community. As they descended deeper into the tunnel system, Marcus's radio crackled with Elena's voice providing updates from the surface. "Marcus, we've got movement on the western perimeter. Scout groups, maybe 20 infected. They're testing our defenses just like you predicted." He keyed his radio quietly, aware that sound carried unpredictably in the enclosed space. "Copy that. Stick to the plan. Keep the exterior lights on and maintain normal patrol patterns. We need them to think we're still planning to make a stand." The deception was crucial. If the infected realized the settlement was evacuating, they might change their approach and potentially discover the tunnel entrances. Marcus had spent the previous night rigging explosive charges throughout Haven Settlement's infrastructure, not to destroy the infected, but to create enough chaos and misdirection to cover their escape. The first real test came when they reached the old Central Station platform, where the tunnels branched in 4 directions. Marcus had scouted this area twice in the past week, but the infected were unpredictable, and their presence could change from hour to hour. He raised his hand, signaling the group to halt, as the beam of his flashlight revealed fresh scratches on the tunnel walls, claw marks that were definitely not there during his previous reconnaissance. Sarah's voice whispered from behind him, barely audible above the group's nervous breathing. "Dad, there's something moving in the northbound tunnel. Multiple contacts, maybe 30 meters ahead." Marcus felt his blood run cold as he processed the implications. The infected had somehow anticipated their route or had simply been drawn to the underground by the same instincts that drove them to seek shelter in darkness. Either way, the evacuation route was compromised, and he had 57 civilians depending on him to get them through alive. Without hesitation, he made the tactical decision that would define the next phase of their journey. "Sarah, take Mrs. Henderson and the children down the southbound tunnel. Follow the route we mapped to the old maintenance junction. If you encounter resistance, use the emergency protocols we discussed." His daughter's eyes reflected the same steel resolve that had carried him through countless battles. At 16, she had already proven herself more capable than soldiers twice her age, and he trusted her judgment implicitly. As Sarah led her group into the southern passage, Marcus turned his attention to the approaching threat. The infected moved with the eerie coordination that had made them so deadly during the initial outbreak, their footsteps creating a rhythm that seemed almost musical in the confined space. He could hear the wet, labored breathing that indicated recent feeding, which meant these infected were at peak aggression and would be particularly dangerous in close quarters. The fight that followed was brutal and swift. Marcus's team had the advantage of preparation and superior positioning, but the infected had numbers and the desperate hunger that drove them to ignore mortal wounds. The sound of gunfire echoed through the tunnels like thunder, each muzzle flash illuminating the nightmare tableau of human survival against inhuman persistence. When the last infected fell, Marcus counted his losses: 2 wounded, 1 seriously, but no fatalities. The injured were quickly treated with the limited medical supplies they had brought, and the group continued deeper into the tunnel system. The sound of distant explosions from above indicated that Elena had begun the planned destruction of Haven Settlement's infrastructure, creating the distraction they needed to complete the evacuation. As they reached the predetermined rally point in the old subway maintenance facility, Marcus allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. The first phase of the evacuation had succeeded, but he knew that the real challenges lay ahead. The tunnel system was vast and largely unmapped, filled with unknown dangers and potentially hostile survivor groups who might not welcome 3,000 refugees. His radio crackled again with Elena's voice, this time carrying good news. "Marcus, second wave is beginning descent. Sarah's group reached the junction safely and is establishing the waypoint. We're going to make this work." Marcus smiled grimly as he surveyed the underground facility that would serve as their temporary command center. The oath he had sworn to protect his people was being tested in ways he had never imagined, but he was determined to see it through. The depths held their own dangers, but they also offered something the surface world no longer provided: hope for a future beyond mere survival. The ground above them shook with violent tremors as the main horde reached Haven Settlement 18 hours ahead of schedule, their arrival marked by the thunderous collapse of the outer defensive walls that had protected the community for 5 years. Marcus pressed his back against the tunnel wall, feeling the concrete vibrate with each impact as tens of thousands of infected swarmed through the abandoned settlement above, their collective weight causing structural damage that rippled down into the subway system. His radio crackled with Elena's strained voice as she coordinated the emergency acceleration of the evacuation from her position in the settlement's command bunker. Marcus, we've lost the north gate. The horde is moving faster than any of our projections indicated. We're implementing Emergency Protocol 7, all remaining evacuees are being routed through the maintenance tunnels regardless of capacity limits. The implications hit him like a physical blow. Protocol 7 meant abandoning the careful phased evacuation plan and pushing everyone into the tunnel simultaneously, creating dangerous overcrowding and the potential for panic that could kill more people than the infected ever would. Marcus keyed his radio with grim determination. Elena, how many people are still up there? The pause before her response told him everything he needed to know. Approximately 1,200 civilians, plus the 43 defenders holding the rearguard positions. Marcus, we're running out of time. 1,200 people. The number echoed in his mind as he calculated the logistics of moving that many evacuees through tunnel systems that were already stretched beyond their safe capacity. The maintenance facility that served as their primary staging area could hold perhaps 300 people comfortably, and they already had nearly that many processing through the various exit routes. The sound of distant screaming filtered down from above, carried through ventilation shafts and structural gaps that connected the underground to the chaos on the surface. Marcus felt the familiar rage building in his chest, the same fury that had sustained him through the darkest days of the outbreak when he had watched civilization collapse around him. These were his people, his responsibility, and he would not let them die because of poor timing and bad luck. Sarah, report, he commanded through his radio, needing to know the status of his daughter's group before he could make the tactical decisions that would determine who lived and who died in the next few hours. Her voice came back strong and clear, carrying the confidence that had made her such an effective leader despite her youth. Dad, we've reached the old electrical substation. The route is clear, but we're seeing increased infected activity in the parallel tunnels. They're not just random wanderers, they're moving in coordinated groups, almost like they're conducting their own search patterns. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground temperature. The infected had always displayed pack behavior, but true tactical coordination was something new and terrifying. If they were actively hunting the evacuees in the tunnels, it meant the underground refuge was compromised before they could fully establish their sanctuary. The radio crackled again, this time with a transmission that made his blood run cold. All units, this is Elena. We have a problem. The infected have found the primary tunnel entrance. They're pouring into the subway system from multiple access points. The evacuation routes are compromised. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 3,000 lives pressing down on him like the tons of concrete and earth above their heads. The careful plans, the detailed preparations, the hope that had sustained them through the planning process, all of it was crumbling in the face of an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. But he had not survived the end of the world by giving up when things looked impossible. He had survived by adapting, by finding solutions when no solutions existed, and by refusing to abandon the people who depended on him. All evacuation leaders, this is Marcus. We're implementing Contingency Plan Omega. Split your groups into units of no more than 20 people each. Use the secondary maintenance tunnels and the old service corridors. Avoid the main transit lines, they're compromised. Make your way to the alternate rally points we identified during reconnaissance. Move fast, stay quiet, and remember that every person you save is a victory against this nightmare. The response was immediate and coordinated, a testament to the training and preparation that had made Haven Settlement more than just another refugee camp. These people had learned to work together, to trust each other, and to follow orders even when those orders led them into darkness and uncertainty. As Marcus began moving his own group toward one of the secondary escape routes, he heard Elena's voice one final time from the surface. Marcus, the command bunker is sealed. We're going to hold this position as long as possible to buy time for the evacuation. Take care of our people. The transmission ended in static, and Marcus knew that Elena and the remaining defenders were making the ultimate sacrifice to give the evacuees a chance at survival. The underground war had begun in earnest, and the battle for the future of human civilization was being fought in the forgotten depths beneath a dead city. Every step forward was a victory, every person saved was a triumph, and every moment of survival was a defiant act of hope against the darkness that had consumed the world above. The choice came without warning, as all the worst decisions do, when Marcus rounded the corner of the maintenance tunnel and found himself facing a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. 12 of his most trusted defenders lay wounded in a hastily constructed barricade, their blood mixing with the stagnant water that pooled on the tunnel floor, while beyond them the terrified faces of 43 civilians huddled in the darkness, including the Patel family with their newborn baby and old Mrs. Chin, who had reminded him so much of his own grandmother. The infected had found them, as they seemed to find everyone eventually, and the running battle that followed had left the defenders too injured to move and the civilians too frightened to abandon them. Marcus's radio crackled with urgent reports from other evacuation groups scattered throughout the tunnel system, each leader facing similar impossible situations, each group hemorrhaging people to the relentless pursuit of the infected hordes that had turned the underground into a labyrinth of death. The tactical situation was clear and brutal in its simplicity. He could save the civilians by evacuating them immediately through the secure route that Sarah had established, but doing so would mean abandoning the wounded defenders to certain death. Alternatively, he could attempt to evacuate everyone, but the time required would allow the infected to catch up and potentially doom both groups. Marcus knelt beside Sergeant Rodriguez, his former second-in-command, whose leg had been mangled by infected claws during the fighting. "Sir, you need to get them out of here," Rodriguez whispered, his voice steady despite the pain etched across his weathered face. "We knew the risks when we signed up for this duty. These people didn't ask for any of this." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, each syllable a reminder of the oath he had sworn and the impossible weight of command that had crushed better men than him. In the distance, he could hear the distinctive sound of infected movement, the scraping of claws on concrete, the wet breathing, the almost musical coordination of their pack behavior that had made them such effective hunters. Time was running out, and every second of hesitation brought death closer to everyone under his protection. Sarah's voice came through the radio, providing the status report that would determine his decision. "Dad, I've reached the junction with the alternate route. The path is clear, but I'm detecting movement in the parallel tunnels. We have maybe 10 minutes before they find us." 10 minutes. The number crystallized in Marcus's mind as he looked at the faces around him, the wounded defenders who had given everything to protect their community, the civilians who had trusted him to lead them to safety, and the impossible mathematics of survival that demanded he choose who would live and who would die. The infected were getting closer, their presence announced by the increasingly frantic radio reports from other groups throughout the tunnel system. Elena's voice had been silent for over an hour, and Marcus feared the worst about the woman who had helped him maintain his humanity in an inhuman world. The defenders at the settlement's command bunker had likely made their final stand, buying precious time with their lives for the evacuees struggling through the underground maze. Marcus made his decision with the cold calculation that had kept him alive through 5 years of hell. "Rodriguez, can your people hold this position for 15 minutes? The sergeant's eyes reflected understanding and grim determination. "We'll hold it, sir. Get them out of here." Marcus turned to address the civilians, his voice carrying the authority that had convinced 3,000 people to follow him into uncertainty. "We're moving now. Stay close, stay quiet, and trust the people leading you. The defenders are buying us time and we're not going to waste their sacrifice." The evacuation that followed was a nightmare of controlled chaos, with Marcus's team moving the civilians through the tunnel system while the sound of gunfire echoed behind them. The wounded defenders were making their final stand, holding the infected long enough for the evacuees to reach Sarah's position at the secure junction. Each gunshot that faded into silence marked another defender who had given his life for the greater good. When they finally reached the junction, Marcus felt the familiar hollow sensation that followed every impossible choice he had been forced to make. Sarah's face reflected the same understanding that had marked her transition from protected daughter to trusted leader, the recognition that survival sometimes demanded sacrifices that hollowed out the soul of anyone decent enough to feel their weight. The radio crackled one final time with Rodriguez's voice, weak but determined. "Package delivered, sir. Route is secure. Tell my family I kept my promise." The transmission ended in static, and Marcus knew that 12 good people had died to save 43 others. The mathematics of survival were brutal and unforgiving, but they were the only currency that mattered in a world where humanity clung to existence by the thinnest of threads. As they moved deeper into the tunnel system, Marcus carried the weight of every choice, every sacrifice, and every life that had been entrusted to his care. The price of leadership was measured not in victories or defeats, but in the souls of good people who had died believing that their sacrifice meant something greater than their individual survival. The abandoned military bunker emerged from the tunnel darkness like a fortress from another age, its reinforced blast doors standing partially open to reveal the harsh glow of emergency lighting that had somehow continued functioning through 5 years of apocalypse. Marcus felt a surge of cautious hope as his exhausted group of survivors approached the facility, their ranks now swollen to nearly 800 people who had converged from various tunnel routes after 3 days of underground nightmare. The bunker represented everything they had lost when Haven Settlement fell: security, permanence, and the possibility of a future that extended beyond mere day-to-day survival. However, as they drew closer to the entrance, Marcus noticed the defensive positions that had been carefully constructed around the facility's perimeter, and the unmistakable glint of rifle barrels tracking their movement from concealed firing positions. This bunker was already occupied, and whoever controlled it was not inclined to welcome refugees with open arms. Sarah moved up beside him, her young face reflecting the same tactical awareness that had made her such an effective leader during their underground journey. "Dad, I count at least 12 defensive positions, probably more that we can't see. They've got overlapping fields of fire and what looks like improvised explosive devices along the approach routes. These people know what they're doing." Marcus nodded grimly, recognizing the professional quality of the defensive setup. Whoever had claimed this bunker understood military tactics and had the resources to implement them effectively. The question was whether they could be reasoned with or if the Haven Settlement refugees would have to fight their way to safety against fellow survivors. The answer came in the form of a loudspeaker that crackled to life, filling the tunnel with an authoritative voice that carried the unmistakable tone of military command. "Attention approaching group. You are entering a restricted area controlled by the Eastern Defense Coalition. State your business and the size of your group." Marcus stepped forward, raising his hands to show he was unarmed while keeping his voice steady and respectful. "This is Sergeant Marcus Chin, formerly of the North American Resistance Command. We are refugees from Haven Settlement, seeking temporary shelter while we regroup and resupply. We have 800 civilians including children and elderly." The silence that followed stretched for several agonizing minutes, broken only by the distant sound of infected movement in the tunnels behind them. Marcus could feel the weight of 800 lives pressing on his shoulders as he waited for a response that would determine whether they had found sanctuary or another battle. When the voice returned, it carried a note of surprise that suggested their arrival had not been anticipated. Haven Settlement was supposed to be evacuated to the Rocky Mountain Fortress. "What are you doing down here?" The question revealed more than the speaker probably intended, confirming that the bunker's occupants were connected to the same command structure that had offered to evacuate only the essential personnel. Marcus chose his words carefully, knowing that honesty might be their only path to survival. "We refused the selective evacuation. We brought everyone or no one at all. Our settlement has fallen, but our people are intact." Another long pause, followed by the sound of muffled conversation from the bunker's interior. Marcus could imagine the debate taking place among the facility's leadership. The practical considerations of resources and security weighed against whatever remained of human compassion in their post-apocalyptic world. The decision, when it came, reflected both the best and worst aspects of survival-focused thinking. "You can enter the outer facility for negotiations, but your people remain in the tunnels until we reach an agreement. Send 5 representatives, no weapons, hands visible at all times." Marcus quickly selected his negotiation team: Sarah for her diplomatic skills, Dr. Kim for medical expertise, Engineer Patel for technical assessment, and Teacher Morrison to represent the civilian population. As they approached the bunker entrance, Marcus felt the familiar weight of command responsibility, knowing that the next few hours would determine the fate of everyone who had trusted him to lead them to safety. The bunker's interior revealed a surprisingly well-organized community of nearly 300 survivors who had clearly been living in the facility for an extended period. Their leader introduced himself as Colonel James Harrison, a career military officer whose weathered face reflected the same burden of command that Marcus carried. The negotiations that followed were tense and complex, with both sides acutely aware that resources were limited and trust was a luxury that few could afford. Harrison's people controlled the bunker, but they lacked the skilled civilian specialists that the Haven Settlement refugees could provide: doctors, engineers, teachers, and farmers who possessed the knowledge needed to rebuild civilization rather than simply survive its collapse. The breakthrough came when Sarah suggested a merger rather than a temporary arrangement, proposing a unified community that would combine Harrison's military expertise with Haven Settlement's civilian skills. The idea was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of competing for resources, the two groups would pool their strengths to create something stronger than either could achieve alone. As the details were hammered out through hours of careful negotiation, Marcus began to see the possibility of something he had thought lost forever, a future that offered hope rather than just survival, a community that could grow and thrive rather than simply endure until the next crisis destroyed it. 3 weeks after the merger agreement was signed in the bunker's makeshift conference room, Marcus stood in the newly constructed observation post overlooking the expanded settlement that had grown beyond anything he had imagined possible in their darkest days. The combination of Colonel Harrison's military resources and Haven Settlement's civilian expertise had created something unprecedented, a thriving community of over 1,100 people who had transformed the bunker complex into a genuine fortress of civilization. The medical bay now operated with equipment salvaged from 3 different settlements. The hydroponic gardens had tripled in size thanks to Engineer Patel's innovations, and the defensive perimeter had been extended to include multiple tunnel access points that provided both security and escape routes. However, the success had come with challenges that tested every principle Marcus had fought to preserve during their desperate journey through the underground. The integration of 2 distinct communities with different survival philosophies had created tensions that occasionally erupted into open conflict, particularly when it came to resource allocation and decision-making authority. Colonel Harrison's people favored strict military hierarchy and ration distribution, while the Haven Settlement refugees had grown accustomed to democratic councils and community-based decisions. Marcus found himself serving as mediator between these competing visions of post-apocalyptic governance, trying to forge a middle path that preserved the best elements of both approaches. Sarah had emerged as the natural leader of the integration effort, her ability to communicate with both military personnel and civilian refugees making her invaluable in bridging the gap between the 2 cultures. She had established mixed patrol teams that combined Harrison's tactical training with Haven Settlement's knowledge of infected behavior, creating a more effective defense force than either group could have fielded independently. The young woman who had started this journey as his protected daughter had become a leader whose judgment he trusted implicitly, and Marcus often found himself following her recommendations rather than giving them. The most significant breakthrough had come when Dr. Kim, working with Harrison's military medical team, discovered something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the infected. While examining tissue samples from recently encountered infected, they found evidence of systematic behavioral modification that suggested external influence rather than natural evolution. The infected were not simply adapting to their environment, they were being directed by some form of coordinated intelligence that operated beyond their current understanding. The implications were staggering and terrifying. Marcus sat in the expanded command center, studying satellite imagery that Harrison's people had managed to access through their military communication systems. The images showed infected movements across the entire continental United States, revealing patterns that were too organized to be coincidental. The horde that had destroyed Haven Settlement was part of a larger migration that was systematically eliminating survivor communities according to what appeared to be a predetermined plan. The question that haunted Marcus was simple and terrible: who or what was directing this coordinated assault on human civilization? Elena's voice suddenly crackled through the radio system, causing Marcus to nearly drop the satellite photos in shock. She was alive, having somehow survived the fall of Haven Settlement and made her way to one of the allied communities that had agreed to join their growing coalition. Her report from the field provided the missing piece of the puzzle that had been troubling Marcus for weeks. "Marcus, you need to hear this. We've captured one of the infected and it's not what we thought. The transformation process is being artificially accelerated by some kind of technological implant. This isn't a natural virus evolution. Someone is weaponizing the infected and using them as a coordinated military force." The revelation sent shockwaves through the command center as the full scope of their situation became clear. They were not simply fighting a mindless plague or even an evolved predator species, they were engaged in warfare against an enemy that possessed both the infected hordes and the technology to control them. The implications for their survival strategy were profound, requiring a complete reassessment of their defensive posture and long-term planning. Colonel Harrison immediately began implementing enhanced security protocols, assuming that their growing coalition had attracted the attention of whoever was orchestrating the infected campaigns. Sarah coordinated with the other allied settlements to establish a communication network that could share intelligence and provide early warning of horde movements. Marcus found himself planning not just for survival, but for active resistance against an enemy whose capabilities and motivations remained largely unknown. The bunker complex became the nerve center for a broader coalition of survivor communities that had banded together in response to the coordinated threat. Representatives from 7 different settlements attended the first formal council meeting, each bringing unique resources and capabilities that strengthened the overall alliance. The meeting concluded with the establishment of the Continental Resistance Network, a coordinated effort to not only survive the infected campaigns but to actively investigate and counter the intelligence behind them. As Marcus looked out over the bustling activity of their expanded community, he realized that his oath to protect his people had evolved into something much larger. He was no longer just defending a single settlement or even a group of refugees, he was helping to coordinate the defense of human civilization itself. The enemy had revealed themselves through their overreach, and now it was time to take the fight to them with the same coordination and determination they had shown in their assault on humanity's survivors. 6 months after the formation of the Continental Resistance Network, Marcus stood atop the newly constructed watchtower that overlooked the sprawling community of New Haven, a settlement that had grown from the desperate merger of refugee groups into a thriving city of over 5,000 people. The morning sun cast long shadows across the agricultural terraces that stepped down the hillside, where children played between the crop rows while their parents worked to harvest the food that would sustain their growing population through the coming winter. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. What had begun as a desperate flight from certain death had evolved into something that resembled the civilization they had all thought lost forever. The watchtower itself was a symbol of how far they had come, constructed not just as a defensive position but as a beacon of hope that could be seen for miles across the reclaimed landscape. Marcus's oath to protect his people had expanded beyond anything he could have imagined during those dark days in the tunnels, encompassing not just the original Haven settlement refugees but a network of allied communities that stretched across 3 states. The Continental Resistance Network had proven more effective than anyone had dared hope, coordinating intelligence, resources and military operations that had successfully countered 6 major infected campaigns over the past months. Sarah approached the observation platform with the confident stride of someone who had found her true calling in leadership. At 17, she commanded the respect of military veterans twice her age and had become the unofficial coordinator of inter-settlement relations, her diplomatic skills having prevented more conflicts than Marcus could count. The young woman who had once needed his protection now stood as his equal in the defense of human civilization, and Marcus felt a pride that went beyond simple paternal affection. She was proof that the future they were fighting for was not just about survival, but about creating a world worthy of the sacrifices that had been made to preserve it. The morning briefing just concluded, Sarah reported, her voice carrying the easy authority that had made her such an effective leader. Elena's intelligence network has confirmed the destruction of the primary control facility in Chicago. The technological implants are no longer being manufactured, and the existing infected are reverting to basic predatory behavior without the coordination protocols. We've effectively broken their command structure. Marcus nodded, remembering the coordinated assault that had finally located and eliminated the hidden facility where the infected control technology had been developed and deployed. The discovery that the apocalypse had been artificially orchestrated by a rogue military faction seeking to remake society according to their own vision had provided both answers and additional motivation for the resistance. The final battle had been brutal but decisive, with multiple settlements coordinating simultaneous strikes that overwhelmed the facility's defenses and destroyed the infrastructure that had made the controlled hordes possible. Elena's voice joined the conversation as she climbed to the observation platform, her medical expertise having proven invaluable in developing countermeasures against the infected control technology. The cure research is showing promising results. We've successfully reversed the transformation process in 12 test subjects, and the psychological rehabilitation protocols are exceeding our most optimistic projections. Within a year, we might be able to begin systematic treatment of the remaining infected populations. The implications were staggering, not just the end of the infected threat, but the possibility of restoring the millions of people who had been transformed against their will. Marcus thought of the ethical debates that would follow, the challenges of reintegrating former infected into society, and the enormous logistical effort required to implement treatment on a continental scale. Yet these were the kinds of problems that indicated hope rather than despair, challenges that suggested a future worth building rather than simply enduring. Colonel Harrison's voice crackled through the radio system, providing an update from the Western Territories where new settlements were being established in areas that had been cleared of infected threats. New Haven Control, this is Western Command. The Oregon settlements are reporting successful harvests and requesting engineering support for expansion projects. The population growth rate is exceeding our infrastructure development capacity, which is a problem we're happy to have. Marcus smiled at the colonel's words, remembering when their greatest concern had been finding enough food to last another day. Now they were dealing with the challenges of rapid growth and expansion, coordinating construction projects and educational programs that would support a population boom driven by both refugees seeking sanctuary and children being born into a world that offered genuine hope for the future. As evening approached and the settlement's lights began to twinkle in the gathering darkness, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. His oath to protect his people had been tested in ways he never could have imagined, requiring sacrifices that had changed him fundamentally while revealing strengths he never knew he possessed. The fence that had once marked the boundary of their small sanctuary had expanded to encompass an entire continent where human civilization was not just surviving but thriving. The children playing in the streets below would grow up in a world where the infected were a historical threat rather than a daily reality, where education and opportunity replaced fear and desperation as the defining characteristics of human existence. Marcus's final watch was not on a defensive wall marking the last stand of humanity, but on a tower overlooking the first chapter of civilization's renewal, where his oath had evolved from protecting the past to building the future.